Hello and welcome to a new edition of The Big Picture, the show where we try to take you beyond the news to understand the larger processes that are driving it. Last week, Jyotiraditya Scindia, a four-time Congress parliamentarian, a former union minister in the United Progressive Alliance government, one of the faces of the next generation of Congress, quit the party and joined the Bharatiya Janata Party. To discuss the significance of Scindia's exit, what it means for the Congress, what it means for the BJP, and the history of leaders switching ranks and switching parties, I have with me a very distinguished guest. Reels Verniers is the co-director of the Trivedi Center for Political Data, housed in the Ashoka University. If you've not looked it up, I would strongly recommend that you see the work that Trivedi Center has done in terms of providing public data on political representation and election patterns. Reels also teaches at the Ashoka University and is a senior visiting fellow at the Center for Political Research. He has extensively worked in Uttar Pradesh, particularly the Samajwadi Party. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
What does Scindia's exit from the Congress tell us about the Congress Party?
Well, what can you really say? I mean, one feels bad to, shoot at the ambulance after it has hit a tree when it comes to the Congress Party. But you can look at it as yet another signal of the state of disarray the party is in. It's not so much about the defection of Mr. Scindia towards the BJP, but the fact that he takes along a large number of MLAs that will, in all probability, precipitate the downfall of the Kamal Nath government. What is striking is the lack of reaction and the lack of anticipation also from the part of the Congress Party, their inability to actually prevent those defections from happening, which sends strong signals about, the state of disarray the party is in, but also its inability to retain some of its oldest members. So one has to look at this issue in a fairly larger context. Since 2014, since 2016 actually, it's the fourth time that the Congress loses either a state government or the chance of forming a state government because of defectors, people basically leaving the party after being elected.
Which are the four states?
The four states are Goa, Manipur, Madhya Pradesh, and Karnataka, of course, where the Kumaraswamy government fell after a large number of Congress MLAs resigned. And so you have to look that into perspective, and you have to look also at who are the people leaving, because one could imagine that many parties have those fly-by-night MLAs, MPs, people who get elected once and then invest in politics for opportunities purpose and would be likely to shift allegiance easily. But in the case of the Congress, what we see in recent times is that most of the people leaving the party are actually seasoned politicians, experienced legislators, people who have been elected 2, 3, 4, 5 times and who are now deserting the party. And in most cases for the BJP, either directly through defections and joining the party immediately, or through an indirect route, either forming a small new party that ultimately merges with the BJP, or getting inducted into the BJP in by-elections or in the next elections, as happened in Karnataka as well.
So given that this has happened a few times in the past few years, and given that Congress has already faced 2 consecutive national electoral losses, what is your reading? Why is it that the Congress leadership is not able to either assert authority or impose a certain disciplinary framework on its legislators and top experienced leaders, as you just mentioned?
Well, one, there is a question of authority. I mean, one can question, when in absence of leadership, you wouldn't know who actually would impose discipline and prevent those defections from happening. And they will be more likely to happen as there is a vacancy at the top. That's one aspect. But the second aspect is more organizational, because one has to look at, what are the incentives for people to join professional politics. Of course, there are the perks of power, the attractiveness of being in power, the status enhancement that comes with it, but also living and rising the rank within a political party also is supposed to offer advantages. A recent trend that is not specific to the Congress Party, but that actually concerns most political parties in India, is that political campaigns have become more and more professionals. You wrote a book about how the BJP professionalized its own electoral machinery. But one effect of the centralization of decision-making power in the context of electoral campaign, the growing involvement of professionals and experts and the Prashant Kishores of the world and many others who have mushroomed in India recently, have made party cadres, MPs, MLAs largely redundant. Now political parties have data machinery that enables them to reach out party workers at the ground level directly without the mediation of the MLAs, of the local cadres, the district level. And so these people are basically, made redundant. And there are fewer and fewer incentives. So it's fine to be made redundant as long as you still belong to a party that wins elections, because you still have the perks of power, because you access to state and so forth, and access to bureaucrats and so forth. But if you belong to a party that experience losses in elections, steep decline, and does not give you any advantages of being a member of that party, even internally, what are the incentives for many seasoned politicians to stay? So it's not entirely surprising that we see them migrating in fairly large number.
And migrating, I think that's a good segue for me, migrating into the BJP. So what does it tell us about the BJP and the fact that despite recent state level setbacks, despite rising street protests, despite an economic slowdown, and despite the perception that BJP today may not be as invincible as it was even 8 months ago, the fact that experienced leaders are still switching to BJP. Does it tell us that within political circles, BJP is still seen as the dominant party and the party to bet on?
Well, despite all those difficulties that you mentioned, the BJP remains completely dominant at the national level. It still does not have a competitor or a serious competitor at the national level. So what we have is a decoupling of state performance versus national performance, but those state performance at the moment do not threaten the BJP's dominance at the center. And that position makes it still very attractive for a lot of people who desert a party for basically greener pasture.
There is a book that Pradeep Chibbar and Rahul Verma wrote about the role of ideology in Indian politics. And I think it's interesting to look at that role of ideology and whether it is indeed salient when leaders switch parties. Do you think the personal incentives that you spoke about, the desire to find space in the power structure is a more compelling motivator for political leaders, or do you think ideology still plays a part?
Ideology still plays a part. I mean, it would be foolish to, claim that all parties basically, share the same kind of color of, ideology. But the question is whether those ideological differences matter to the political personnel. The fact is that political parties across the board tend to recruit their candidates in the same sociological pool of local elite, local dominant group, mostly men. And so in terms of sociological composition, political parties have become largely undifferentiated. And that eases this process of, revolving door between political parties, because you'd be hard pressed to, look at to see many differences between, a Congress MLA or a BJP MLA in a state like Gujarat or in Madhya Pradesh, where also the level of ideological differentiation is not that pronounced in those bipolar states either. So there are ideological differences, but it does not mean that those ideological differences translate into differentiated sort of political recruitment. And the fact that parties recruit politicians of their cadres pretty much in the same way makes it easier, reinforces that phenomenon of migration.
So given this recent crisis and the possible fall of the Madhya Pradesh government, which would lead Congress powerless both at the national level and in one less state, what do you think is the road ahead? We spoke about the problems and the fact that the leadership probably does not have the authority right now. You think that a stronger leadership in the form of, say, Rahul Gandhi returning and asserting control is the way out? Or you think that, as some younger congressmen have been arguing, there have to be open elections for Congress presidency and CWC, and that will lead to revival?
Yeah, I mean, the Congress is basically trapped in this catch-22 situation where they are under the impression that without a Gandhi, the party will, dissolve. And as it happened actually in the mid-90s before Sonia Gandhi took the reign. And at the same time, they are also convinced that the Gandhi family does not have the vote-catching power that they used to have anymore. So it's either keep losing elections and survive, or face destruction. So neither prospect is, particularly enchanting for the Congress right now. It's always useful to remember that the Congress party still has more vote share than the BJP had in 2009, about 19% against 18% for the BJP at that time, and that the BJP was also in complete organizational disarray in the following years until Mr. Modi emerged and took control of the party. So it seems most likely that a revival could only come through the emergence of an external actor or an outlier. But the problem is, identifying who that person would be. And as of now, no one is really sticking their neck out.
My final question is about the younger leaders in the Congress. Mr. Scindia was seen as I said, one of the next generation faces. We have seen the fact that Sachin Pilot is unhappy in Rajasthan because he was not given chief ministership. We have seen some other leaders, be it Jitin Prasad in UP or Milind Deora in Bombay, who feel that they have not been given adequate space in the structure. Some existing MPs within the party also don't seem to have the same level of comfort with the Nehru Gandhi family. So in this context, would it be fair to say that what we are seeing is an old guard versus young leaders battle, or would that be too simplistic?
That's a bit simplistic, because that new guard that you're describing are pretty much the progenitor of the old party, old guard, and Rahul Gandhi surrounded himself with sons, daughters, but also individuals whose parents or close parents were associated with his own father in the previous decade. And Rahul Gandhi also surrounded himself with young promising politicians, but who did not have a very strong electoral base. So Mr. Scindia is a national Congress leader. He's a former union minister. He's by any stretch of the imagination a powerful and influential person. But as a Madhya Pradesh politician, he's a second-rang leader at best, or he's a faction leader at best, who does not have a very large popular base.
Except in northern Madhya Pradesh, Gwalior Chambal region.
Yes, exactly, and the Guna seat and things like that. But that makes him at best sub-regional leader is in his own state. And you could say the same about Sachin Pilot, even though he has also made progress, he has campaigned extensively, but he still does not have the command, the authority, and the popularity that Ashok Gehlot has locally. So the system, this division of labor, can work as long as there are positions to be given to these younglings, well, not so young anymore, but to these young politicians at the center when the Congress is in power. But now that it's out of the picture, there's not much left for them. And they don't have the base themselves to become chief ministers
on their own. So the party is trapped in a vicious cycle. Not being in power reduces the opportunities that they can offer to leaders.
Yeah.
The fact that there are limited opportunities means that these leaders then get unhappy and they leave the party.
Yeah.
And once they leave the party gets weaker, and the prospect of it returning to power reduces even further.
You summed it right.
Thank you so much, Reel. That was very insightful. Thank you so much for joining us. Please join us for the next edition of The Big Picture next week.